How does a war go from eerie silence to explosions across 5 Iranian provinces in a single night? And if the calm was only an illusion, what does that say about what comes next? Before we go deeper, take 2 seconds to like this video, subscribe, and share it with one person who wants the real story instead of another empty headline. For nearly a week, the region seemed to breathe out. No fresh blast videos, no breaking alerts every few minutes, no new maps covered in arrows and red circles. After months of fear, that kind of silence can fool people. Families sleep a little easier. Traders relax. Analysts start saying maybe the worst has passed. Then everything changed. In one violent burst, the United States launched strikes across 5 Iranian provinces and multiple islands. These targets were connected to Iran's southern military position. One night, one decision. One shockwave powerful enough to erase the idea that this war was cooling down. What made it so important was not only the size of the attack, it was the timing and the target list. The message behind it mattered, the fact that even after a strike this large, the war still did not end. That is what makes this moment so dangerous. It did not look like a small act of retaliation. It looked like a warning sent at full volume, a reminder that underneath every quiet stretch, pressure is still building. Pressure inside command rooms, pressure inside governments, pressure inside markets, pressure inside homes where ordinary people keep wondering whether tonight will be the night everything gets worse. To understand why this strike wave mattered so much, we need to slow down and pull the whole thing apart. Events like this feel sudden, but they are usually built over time. Warnings come first, then small moves, then failed pauses. Then somebody decides the old rules are no longer enough. This war had already been locked in a brutal rhythm for months. Pressure, retaliation, threats, temporary pauses, broken understandings. Then pressure again. Every round left more anger behind it. Every round made the next one easier to imagine. That matters, because once a conflict falls into that rhythm, silence stops feeling peaceful. It starts feeling suspicious. And that suspicion turned out to be right. Reports indicated that after several quiet nights, Iran carried out a missile attack tied to U.S. forces in the region. Washington did not answer with one symbolic strike. It did not choose one building and declare the score settled. It answered broadly. The response was coordinated, wide, and aimed at several parts of Iran's southern military network at the same time. That choice tells us something immediately. The goal was bigger than revenge. If all you want is revenge, you can hit one famous target and call it justice. But if your goal is to reduce future capability, shake command systems, interrupt supply, blind surveillance, and force confusion, then you spread the pain. You do not just punish, you degrade. That is why the map matters. When strikes hit several provinces at once, the effect is not only physical, it is organizational. Commanders struggle to build a clear picture. Local units cannot easily tell which nearby assets are still working. Air defenses are stretched. Repair crews are overwhelmed. Rumors move faster than facts. And in war, uncertainty can be as damaging as the blast itself. The southern provinces involved were not random places chosen for dramatic effect. Southern Iran matters because it ties together coastal defense, missile positioning, drone activity, and naval pressure. It represents the larger contest over shipping in the Gulf. If you want to signal that attacks carry a price, that is where you aim. The island targets mattered for the same reason. Those islands are not just dots on a map. They can serve as observation points, radar sites, support positions, and symbols of reach. Hitting them says this operation is about the southern front, the maritime picture, and infrastructure. This infrastructure helps Iran apply pressure near one of the most sensitive waterways in the world. And that waterway is the shadow hanging over everything. Because this war is not only about bombs and retaliation, it is also about shipping routes, oil flows, insurance costs, investor fear, and the price of energy far away. A strike in southern Iran can echo through ports, stock markets, and household budgets thousands of miles away. That is one reason every escalation here is watched so closely by governments that are not firing a single missile. Now think about how fast the emotional picture flipped. Only days earlier, some people were starting to believe exhaustion might slow things down. Maybe the cost had become too obvious. Maybe private diplomacy was finally doing something. Then, in a matter of hours, those hopes were buried under one of the heaviest American strike waves of the conflict. That kind of swing changes psychology. It tells every country in the region that apparent calm cannot be trusted. It tells every military planner that a dormant front can wake up without warning. It tells civilians that a peaceful night may not mean safety at all. Sometimes it only means a larger decision is being prepared somewhere they cannot see. And maybe the most unsettling part is this. The strike wave looked enormous, but it also looked controlled. That sounds contradictory, but it is the core tension of the whole story. The United States escalated hard, yet it still appeared to choose its lane carefully. The reported targets centered on military and security infrastructure. Command hubs and missile storage, coastal defense systems, naval-linked assets, and surveillance positions were targeted across the facilities. In other words, the package looked broad, but not unlimited. That distinction matters more than most realize. There's a huge difference between hitting military capability and hitting the economic spine of a country. One is a message wrapped in force. The other can become regional economic warfare. One aims to reduce immediate threat. The other can rattle energy markets and panic allies. It can slam shut diplomatic exits that some leaders still hope to preserve. So even on a night that looked like overwhelming force, restraint may still have been operating in the background. And that is where this story becomes bigger than the explosions themselves. Because the real question is not only what got hit, the real question is what did not get hit, and why. If Washington had chosen to strike major dual-use economic infrastructure or oil export arteries, the message would have been harsher. But the message to the world would have been louder too. This conflict is moving into a far more dangerous phase. Instead, the operation appeared to stop short of that line. That does not make it small, it makes it deliberate. And once you see that, the whole night starts to look less like blind anger and more like hard pressure with boundaries. Hit hard enough to restore fear, wide enough to shake the system, focused enough to avoid lighting a wider economic fire. If that balance sounds unstable, that is because it is. It depends on the hope that a state under heavy military pressure will read restraint as a signal instead of weakness. It depends on the belief that you can damage serious capability without sliding into total war. It depends on the assumption that regional actors will keep pushing for limits even while violence rises. That is a risky bet. And yet, for months, this conflict has looked like one long attempt to manage risk without ending it. Every side wants leverage. Very few want the full price of total collapse. That is why nights like this become turning points. Not because they solve the war, but because they reveal hidden logic. The logic is simple and terrifying. Escalation and restraint are happening at the same time. The bombs say one thing. The target list says another. The public rhetoric says one thing. The lines that remain uncrossed say another, and civilians are trapped in the middle of that contradiction. That is where we have to stop talking only about strategy and remember the human reality underneath it. Behind every phrase like strike package or target set, there are streets and apartment blocks, hospital corridors, blackout zones, terrified children, and exhausted parents reside there. These are people who never chose any of this. When attacks spread across a wide area, precision does not erase danger. A missile may hit the exact coordinates it was assigned. That does not mean the consequences stay neatly inside the fence line. Military facilities often sit close to towns, roads, homes, power lines, and public infrastructure. Some of that overlap comes from decades of development. Some of it may come from deliberate placement. Either way, civilians pay for it. Reports from the aftermath pointed to deaths beyond the military sphere. That matters, and it should never be treated as background noise. People sometimes speak as if a strike becomes clean simply because it was designed to be precise. But a war does not become humane just because advanced weapons were used. War remains war. A shattered building does not care whether the people inside were part of the plan. And the emotional effect matters strategically too. Civilian death hardens opinion. It fuels propaganda. It gives leaders images that can be used to deepen anger. Impact can reshape the next phase of the conflict. That is one reason these operations rarely produce clean outcomes. From one angle, Washington can point to disrupted capability. From another, Tehran can point to blood and damage. Both things can be true at once. A military success can also become a political complication. And that leads to the deeper contest under the surface, the fight over meaning. In modern war, missiles hit physical targets, but governments also fight to control the story. Who started this round? Who broke restraint? Who was acting in defense? Who is threatening the region? Every country involved wants to answer those questions before the public settles on its own version. That is why official language matters. The United States frames broad strikes like this as protection. Protection of troops, protection of shipping, and protection of regional partners are the stated goals. The message is that force is being used to reduce future danger. Iran frames the same event differently. Its leaders present these attacks as aggression and foreign pressure. They claim Washington is widening the conflict. The message is that Iran is under assault and therefore justified in resisting. Neither narrative exists only for outside audiences. Both are meant for domestic audiences too. Governments fighting a long war need their own people to believe the cost has meaning. They need soldiers to believe sacrifice is necessary. They need families to believe the danger is not pointless. That is why the battle over narrative can last even longer than the battle over territory. And on nights like this, narrative moves fast. One side points to the trigger, the other points to damage. One points to military targets, the other points to civilian deaths. One says necessary, the other says reckless. In the space between those arguments sits the wider region, trying to figure out the next step. If this breakdown is helping you see the deeper pattern, tap like and hit subscribe. Now let's look at the military logic more closely, because this is where many people stop too early. A wide strike is not automatically a smart strike. Size alone does not tell you whether the operation worked. To judge that, you have to ask what planners were likely trying to achieve in the hours after impact. First, they would want shock. Not just fear, but command shock inside the opposing system. Too many things went wrong at once to process clearly. Second, they would want degradation of real capability. Not symbolism, not a dramatic photo. Actual interruption to storage, launch, and transport matters. Third, they would want signaling. Not only toward Tehran, but toward every actor watching the region. Signaling says, this is how far we are willing to go if you cross this line. Fourth, they would want controlled escalation. Hit hard enough to change calculation, but avoid total explosion. That fourth goal is usually the hardest, because the other side gets a vote in the outcome. No matter how carefully one government calibrates force, the opponent may read the event through pride or fear. A strike intended as controlled can be received as humiliation. A line meant as limited can be interpreted as the start. And once that happens, the logic of restraint can collapse very fast. Immediate aftermath matters just as much. After a strike of this size, the region does not only watch the damage, it watches the response. Does Iran answer directly or through allied groups, through missiles or through maritime disruption? Those choices reveal whether the strike imposed caution or simply stored up more rage. The uncomfortable truth in this conflict is that damage has not always produced silence. Again and again, heavy blows have reduced capability without eliminating intent. Assets are lost, but will remains. Networks are disrupted, but not erased. Leaders absorb pain, then search for a way to answer. A militarily impressive night can still fail politically if it does not change the opposing side's larger calculation. This is one reason wars like this feel endless from the outside. Each side can point to successful actions. Each side can say the other has been hurt. Each side can argue it is still standing. Because neither side fully collapses, the conflict settles into a grim kind of persistence. Not peace, not victory, just repeated proof that both still have enough capacity to continue. That is a frightening balance. It means every pause is temporary until something deeper changes. Deeper change is hard when regional politics keep pulling in opposite directions. Some governments want Iran checked and deterrence restored, but they do not want their economies dragged into chaos. They do not want commercial routes collapsing. They push for toughness and limits at the same time. That makes them central to this story, even when they are not launching the strikes. Behind the scenes, allies can shape what happens by warning against steps that create unbearable economic consequences. Geography gives them no luxury of distance. A decision taken in one capital can send fear through their ports. A single night of bombing cannot be read only as a military event. It is also a negotiation. A negotiation carried out through target choice, timing, public language, and private messages. It is force, signaling, market pressure, alliance management, and fear of uncontrolled escalation all folding together. The phrase, 5 provinces at once, is a compressed description of a much bigger contest. The operation was about proving reach. Reach matters because it changes what the other side thinks is safe. If multiple provinces and islands can be hit in one window, no regional command can assume distance protects it. No storage site can assume being one among many is enough to hide it. This changes planning. Resources must be spread more thinly. Security must be broadened. Movement becomes riskier. Repair becomes a race. All of that consumes time, money, and confidence. Even if damaged facilities are replaced later, it is costly. It eats budgets and creates bottlenecks. When people ask if a strike worked, the answer is layered. Immediate damage, short-term disruption, psychological pressure, and political messaging are all part of the answer. The problem is that these layers do not always add up to resolution. Sometimes they only buy time. Time can cut both ways. It can create space for diplomacy, or it can create space for the next round. That is why the diplomatic side matters. Even while exchange intensified, diplomacy had not disappeared. Regional leaders could intervene quietly. Public threats could turn out to be stronger than the final execution. None of that means peace was close, but it does mean the war was still being managed. A managed war is still brutal. People still die. Cities still lose power. Families still run from windows. But management means there are still lines someone cares about, perhaps out of economics or alliance pressure. On this night, some lines seemed to hold, even as others shattered. It showed readiness to use force. It also showed that Washington still appeared unwilling to cross every possible threshold. It showed regional players how fragile the calm really was. Silence is not the same thing as safety. Large strike waves do not come together in an hour. They depend on intelligence, timing, and logistics. Planners compare surveillance feeds and imagery to decide which sites mattered now, weighing value against risk. Every choice shapes what the opponent can still do in the next 30 minutes of engagement. A strike broadens complexity across flight paths and launch windows. The operation must feel synchronized. This suggests preparation and a desire to overwhelm the enemy's ability to think clearly in real time. That has a psychological impact on American forces, too, because large operations are followed by fear of retaliation. Bases go on alert. Air defenses stay ready. Commanders assume there may be proxy launches or harassment. The bombing window may end, but the danger window does not. Escalation changes daily life for service members. It changes routines, sleep, and the meaning of every radar signal, carrying a high financial and human cost. Sustaining a large military posture is expensive. Taxpayers may hear about the night, not the machinery behind it. There's the pilot trying to stay sharp, the crew chief working under pressure, and the soldier at a regional base. Is the strategy working? What counts as success? No government likes answering these while the war is moving. Confidence in public does not erase uncertainty in private. Leaders deal with incomplete information and shifting assessments. If a government capable of striking harder chooses not to, it is because it fears the next rung on the ladder. A blow to southern Iranian military infrastructure is also a signal to every actor tied to the Strait of Hormuz. When conflict touches that space, the economic effect can begin before the physical effect is measured. Repeated force has not produced lasting quiet. Repeated diplomacy has not produced lasting trust. The conflict survives in an unstable middle state. Quiet nights may hide military planning or political timing. A quiet period in a war like this may not mean progress. It may mean the next move has not happened yet. In wars built on retaliation, control is temporary until the next misread signal or attack that hits the wrong place. The real warning is that an enormous night could happen after silence and still not settle anything. The pattern remains: silence, tension, shock, and retaliation. Remember what quiet can hide when headlines tell you things have calmed. The most dangerous moment is often the one that looks calm right before the sky lights up.